Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, March the 2nd, 2021. So the theme for today's show is the age of liberalism is over. And by liberalism, I mean free inquiry. I mean, one could go so far to say, as I have previously, that the age of reason is over, that what we are seeing across the West is a return to magical thinking, the world of myth and not empirical evidence. To start, this is from Mark Pratt of the Associated Press. 6 Dr. Seuss books, including And to Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street and If I Ran the Zoo, will stop being published because of racist and insensitive imagery, the business that preserves and protects the author's legacy, said Tuesday. Yes, definitely. If you're looking to preserve and protect the legacy of Dr. Seuss, you want to announce to the whole world that he was a hideous racist. These books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong. Dr. Seuss Enterprises told the AP in a statement that coincided with the late author and illustrator's birthday. How appropriate. Ceasing sales of these books is only part of our commitment and our broader plan to ensure Dr. Seuss's Enterprises catalog represents and supports all communities and families, it said. The other books affected are McElgott's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. The decision to cease publication and sales of the books was made last year after months of discussion, the company which was founded by Seuss's family told AP. Dr. Seuss Enterprises listened and took feedback from our audiences, including teachers, academics, and specialists in the field, as part of our review process. We then worked with a panel of experts, including educators, to review our catalog of titles. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, an Asian person is portrayed wearing a conical hat, holding chopsticks, and eating from a bowl. Because as we know, Asian people never wear conical hats or hold chopsticks or eat from a bowl. If I Ran the Zoo includes a drawing of 2 barefooted African men wearing what appear to be grass skirts with their hair tied above their heads. And of course, African men never appear in that guise. Dr. Seuss, born Theodore Seuss Geisel in Springfield, Massachusetts, March the 2nd, 1904, remains popular, earning an estimated $33 million before taxes in 2020, up from just $9.5 million 5 years ago. Forbes listed him number 2 on its highest paid dead celebrities of 2020, behind only the late pop star Michael Jackson. Random House Children's Books, Dr. Seuss's publisher, issued a brief statement Tuesday. We respect the decision of Dr. Seuss Enterprises and the work of the panel that reviewed this content last year and their recommendations. Dr. Seuss is adored by millions around the world for the positive values in many of his works, including environmentalism and tolerance. But criticism has grown in recent years over the way Blacks, Asians, and others are drawn in some of his most beloved children's books, as well as in his earlier advertising and propaganda illustrations. Yes, wait until they see the Private Snafu cartoons. Seuss wasn't the only one who worked on them during World War II for the American government, but they are about a, how would I say, rather incompetent private soldier, and I think we know what the acronym means. And these cartoons are spicy. The National Education Association, which founded Read Across America Day in 1998 and deliberately aligned it with Geisel's birthday, has for several years de-emphasized Seuss and encouraged a more diverse reading list for children. Yes, I suppose green creatures are not diverse enough. For the country's libraries, what to do with the Seuss books being withdrawn continues a long-standing conflict between the values of free expression and acknowledging that some content may be hurtful. Libraries rarely pull a book, even when some find it racist or otherwise offensive, says Deborah Caldwell Stone, who heads the ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom. They are more likely to place it in a less prominent location or otherwise choose not to promote it. Shelf space is precious, and librarians do periodically cull the book collections and remove some titles. What, is she kidding? Public libraries overturn their collections on a regular basis. Have you ever gone to a library sale in your city and see how many volumes have been removed? But they usually do it because no one is asking for that book anymore, Caldwell Stone said. Well, as we have seen, Dr. Seuss remains exceedingly popular. What else do we have going on here? Numerous other popular children's series have been criticized in recent years for alleged racism. In the 2007 book, Should We Burn Babar?, the author and educator, Herbert K. Cole, contended that Babar the Elephant books were celebrations of colonialism because of how the title character leaves the jungle and later returns to civilize his fellow animals. One of the books, Babar's Travels, was removed from the shelves of a British library in 2012 because of its alleged stereotypes of Africans. Critics also have faulted the Curious George books for their premise of a white man bringing home a monkey from Africa. Curious George. Yes, I heard about this some years ago. One would have to be an exceedingly nasty person to have anything against Curious George. Breitbart reports, well, as I keep saying, buy these things while you still can. Books, DVDs, Blu-rays, CDs, because a lot of them are going to disappear. Charlie Spearing at Breitbart reports sales of recently announced banned Dr. Seuss books spiked on Amazon Tuesday after they were canceled from the left. Dr. Seuss's books were among the leading 17 on the top 50 list of Amazon's movers and shakers on Tuesday morning after the ban was announced. Sales ranks of the book, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, were up 46,000% on the list and was ranked number 1. Breitbart tweeted, Dr. Seuss is now racist. Consider this your woke cancel culture warning. In the event your children are spotted with copies and or authorities find out you've read these stories to your children. Oh, and of course, President Joe Biden eliminated all mentions of Dr. Seuss in his proclamation to celebrate Read Across America Day, despite eager endorsements of the author by his predecessor, President Barack Obama. In 2016, Obama wrote, March 2nd is also the birthday of one of America's revered wordsmiths, Theodore Seuss Geisel, or Dr. Seuss used his incredible talent to instill in his most impressionable readers universal values we all hold dear. I think there's a very strong possibility that President Biden's children were read Dr. Seuss books, either by their mother or by the president himself. Is it enough simply not to mention him? Shouldn't Biden be groveling for having read these books or allowed them to be read? This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. There's a phrase from Shiva Naipaul, his book about Jim Jones, that I like to use a lot. Universal mental retardation. He's referring to the Bay Area circa 1980. Amazon was forced to redesign a new logo for its app after Twitter users claimed that the image resembled Adolf Hitler. Yes, really. The newly reworked app logo, which was released in January, featured a cardboard box design with a strip of blue tape on it. After the launch, Twitter users complained that the image reminded them of the toothbrush mustache worn by the Nazi dictator. Sam Hutchins had tweeted, my parents use Amazon nearly every day. They're going to be lost for the next few days. When they ask where Amazon's gone, I'll tell them to look for the cardboard Hitler. Who is this creep? Oh, he has a cartoon rendering of himself wearing a mask, of course, problem glasses, and most of his face shielded by an Apple laptop. He describes himself as autistic, bisexual human, pronouns he, him, solver of problems, also known as a designer. And of course, whenever I'm looking for advice, the first person that I go to is an autistic, bisexual human. I mean, doesn't everybody? Yesterday, Watson continues, people began to notice that the design had been changed, with the blue tape now looking more like a post-it note. Amazon reportedly made the change back on February the 22nd. The company didn't acknowledge that it changed the logo due to complaints about it supposedly resembling Hitler, although it seems very likely. In a vague statement provided to Today, the company said Amazon is always exploring new ways to delight our customers. We designed the new icon to spark anticipation, excitement, and joy when customers start their shopping journey on their phone, just as they do when they see our boxes on their doorstep. And in other Hitler news, do you know that Adolf Hitler died in 1945? That was 76 years ago. He didn't exactly go out at the top of his game either. Yes, bunker. The Russian troops were closing in. Yes. Again, not at the top of his game. This is from the Daily Mail. CPAC organizer says Hyatt buckled to cancel culture after hotel chain apologizes several times following claims that conference stage design was built to resemble Nazi imagery. This is an exceedingly foolish apology. Hyatt originally took the line, look, it's all CPAC. There's nothing to do with us. But now they have admitted that one of their venues prominently displayed Nazi imagery. Foolish, foolish people. Hyatt Hotels, which was hosting the event at the Hyatt Regency Orlando property in Florida, called symbols of hate abhorrent after the stage at CPAC drew comparisons to a Norse rune used by the Nazis during World War II. A photo of the CPAC stage went viral on social media Saturday, with thousands of Twitter users sharing posts comparing its distinctive design to an Othello rune, something that no one had heard of until Saturday. One of many ancient European symbols that Nazis adopted to reconstruct a mythic Aryan past, according to the Anti-Defamation League. Yes. And again from the Mail, 2 teenage boys are suing an exclusive Catholic school for $20 million, claiming the blackface photo they were forced out over was actually green acne medication. So if people dress up as the Incredible Hulk for Halloween or whatever, do they get canceled for that? Is green the new black? The former students and their parents launched the lawsuit against St. Francis High School in Mountain View, California. Mountain View, California. That's Silicon Valley. After the viral image sparked outrage last year. Yeah, sure it did. They say the school offered them an ultimatum to leave or be expelled. The school says the teens left voluntarily. A third boy who was in the image went to a different school and is not involved in the suit. A selfie taken in August of 2017 shows the 3 boys when they were 14 years old, topless with a dark green mask on their face. In the suit, launched in Santa Clara County Superior Court in August, it is claimed that one boy suffered with severe acne. He had a pic taken with a white face mask a day prior to the green one, it adds. In a statement, the 2 families said, this lawsuit is our attempt to redeem our names and reputations and to correct the record to reflect the truth of what actually happened. A photograph of this innocent event was plucked from obscurity and grossly mischaracterized during the height of a nationwide social unrest. I should mention that the first Dungeons and Dragons episode of Community, one of my favorite ever TV shows, has already been pulled from streaming services because it shows the character Mr. Chang, a Chinese man played by a Korean actor, Ken Jeong. He is dressed up as an elf or some such, and he has pitch black skin not just his face, but his neck and his hands, and a white wig. And I mean white. There's clearly no attempt to represent this person as a African American, but never mind. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Gamion, to Dan. Metal Mike says Seuss discriminated against cats without hats. Shameful. Hello to our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Metal Mike says green eggs and hams is a perfectly appropriate meal in disadvantaged communities. The white privilege of Dr. Seuss blinded him to that fact. Jay Miller says racism is finished. Chogokin666 says Dumbo is bad too, right? I've never seen the movie. Is Africa involved? Aren't there two kinds of elephants, Indian elephants and African elephants? But I suppose it would be best to simply avoid elephants altogether. Giraffes, zebras, any such animals. Too dangerous. Steve says, if this is what a decade after decade of anti-racist policy gets you, why bother? Justin Proto says, a cartoon box Hitler that hoovers up the wealth of the middle class. Hello to Professor Pohl. Oh, yes, let's talk about embarrassment. This is from Fox News. Former CIA Director John Brennan lamented his own whiteness on Monday, suggesting that other men of his race were acting in embarrassing ways. Then why don't you disappear, John Brennan? Do we really need to hear from you since you're so very embarrassing and white? You also lied under oath to Congress about surveilling them, tapping into their computers. You also voted for the Communist Party in the 1976 presidential election. I'm increasingly embarrassed to be a white male these days when I see what my other white males are saying, he told Nicole Wallace, who laughed in response. She, Brennan, and Senator Claire McCaskill were arguing that Republicans had lied about the truth of what had happened during the riots on January the 6th. It just shows that with very few exceptions, like Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, there are so few Republicans in Congress who value truth, honesty, and integrity. Yes, the truth, honor, integrity, like the Russia Gate hoax or the Ukraine Gate hoax. Yes. But John Brennan, he stands stalwart for truth when it's convenient for him. This is from RT. And this is a very, very amusing story. It's another example. We saw it with that longtime science reporter, McNeil from the New York Times. I'm not a racist. I'm a liberal. Well, you're just putting a target on your back, then your front, and your head. Attempted civil discourse on Wokism ends in clubhouse room coup. Jewish prof shut down as spicy white and demands for cash. Evolutionary biologist Brett Weinstein had to relive his evergreen college moment when he was attacked from all sides in a clubhouse room hijacked by hostile anti-racist mob, aghast at the idea of white people discussing wokeism. The room, dubbed Is Clubhouse Obsessed with Wokism, was created by independent journalist Michael Tracy, who said he thought the Clubhouse chats almost inevitably evolve into a discussion of wokeism, but there's seldom anyone in the room who identifies enough with the ideology to give a defense of it. His attempt to create a safe space for a civil discourse and let both woke and anti-woke understand each other better was successful at first, with Tracy tweeting that expanded into a large multiracial discussion. Little did he know that the title of the room was more like a foreshadowing of things to come. Tracy had tweeted, I actually started a new room trying to remedy this very issue, and sure enough, it's expanded into a large multiracial discussion of wokeism. Pretty fascinating. It's international too, which is doubly interesting. US, Egypt, UK, Jamaica, Sweden. Helping Tracy moderate the discussion was a black man called George, who appeared to be doing a decent job at maintaining an orderly list of speakers while trying to enable both sides push back against each other's arguments. However, George left at some point while the queue of the wannabe speakers grew increasingly longer, and frustrated, they couldn't vent their grievances, especially those on the woke side. A black woman called Brooklyn somehow ended up being a moderator, which, thanks to the clubhouse rules, enabled her to boot Tracy from his own chat room and mute him. A 5-hour-long recording of the discussion, which took place February 26th, resurfaced on social media Monday. And sometime after the 2-hour mark, it descends into pure mayhem. Philosopher Prince Prophet Coinaday had tweeted less than 10 minutes into George being gone, and the conversation has already shifted perceptibly in tone. People are upset because the list he established isn't being followed. Michael Tracy is clearly in way over his head, but he wanted to see woke and is going to. Oh, we have some profanity coming up. The self-appointed leader of the discussion announced that the white people BS was over, sending all the Caucasians to the back of the line and scolding the fucking delusional white participants for making use of the term woke and its variations. Don't use the word wokism. Don't use woke. Don't use any of our dialect. It's not for you, she declared, adding that she didn't even understand why you let that white man in here with that bullshit. Several others loudly cheered Brooklyn, and a string of pretty one-sided BLM-themed tirades followed for nearly an hour before the new moderator decided to bring in the attending Professor Brett Weinstein for a kill. Weinstein was on the defensive as soon as he took the stage, having to explain his work in evolutionary biology, as one of the women controlling the discussion repeatedly insisted that the discipline was the same thing as eugenics. Brooklyn and others would barely let Weinstein get a word in edgewise, deliberately misinterpreting the few utterances he was able to make. His declaration that he was 100% anti-racist, for example, was deliberately flipped to 100% anti-black, and his inability to answer multiple questions at once made his inquisitors impatient. Give us the answers now and quickly, or you're all going to get off the stage, the woman snarled, later urging her companions to stop letting this man wiggle out of answering the questions. He was also accused of being an investor in the Clubhouse platform, which currently operates on an invite-only basis in a series of Zoom-like rooms, but with audio only. He attempted to explain that his aims in studying evolutionary biology were to recognize racism and genocide emerge out of evolution, what we can do about it, and denying the discipline was a means to spread scientific transphobia, only to have his words turned against him in a rather bizarre fashion. You're a scientist and you use anecdotal experience to justify your view on pronouns, another man on the chat said accusingly. Just because someone has only ever eaten hot dogs doesn't mean hamburgers don't exist. And if hamburgers can see your statements, then why are you making them? Again, Shiva and I, Paul, universal mental retardation. Weinstein did make an attempt to dodge the allegations of whiteness that dominated the proceedings, clearly sensing that being of a Caucasian disposition in such a climate was borderline criminal. He protested that he was Jewish, claiming it's a different thing, and reminding that the Jews have too been persecuted, only for one of his interlocutors to correct him. You're spicy white, she said. Weinstein was finally chased off stage as he attempted to turn the train wreck into a civilized debate. We can have a disagreement, he began, only for several of the others to start talking over him. You're going to have to go to the audience and you need to cash out everybody up here $1,000 before you coming back up, Brooklyn declared smugly. Another man insisted that after the group had done Weinstein the favor of letting him speak, he had merely proven himself a white supremacist by spewing white supremacist talking points. He did not say what those talking points were. The professor was then apparently forcibly muted by the moderator. Weinstein was famously run out of Evergreen State College by a mob of angry students in 2017 after questioning the need for a day of absence in which white students would be banned from campus, the flip side of a long-standing protest by Black students in which they stayed home to call attention to their significance on campus. Yeah. I'm always, as always, reminded of a famous line from the great movie Sweet Smell of Success. Don't remove the gangplank, Sydney. You may want to get back on board. Oh, no, I'm not white. I'm not white. I'm Jewish. Is that really wise? Is that really prudent? Do we want to stop discussing white privilege and start discussing Jewish privilege? Yes, Professor Weinstein, you might want to get back on board. Safety in numbers, as they say. Let's go back to the chat here. Dawn from Beyond says, my new recurring nightmare, American population has been vastly reduced by the gene. No, I can't say that. Can't say that, sorry. Our Finnish friend Jaakko Raipala says, the R word is now one of the bad words. I'm pretty sure Dumbo is prejudiced against idiots as well. Jay Miller says, LOL at the Brett Weinstein audio clip. I was mortified for him. What an obsequious muppet. Steve says, wait, isn't anecdotal experience the same as lived experience? No, anecdotal experience is white. Lived experience is Black or BIPOC or whatever. Dan says, laugh my ass off, spicy white. Dan Allison says, hang on just a second here. Dan Allison says that, I'll just explain. When you scroll on the live chat here, it moves very quickly indeed. I'm about as sick as these progressive identity jackoffs as a man can be, says Dan Allison. Ed McNeck says, I just got on a plane. The stewardess reminded us all to keep our masks on throughout the flight, even if we're fully vaxxed and have tested negative for Wu flu. I now hold all of humanity in contempt. So I'm assuming that on these flights, they no longer serve any form of food or drink, not even nuts or cans of Coke. All right. Well, yeah, I don't want to get into that. Teddy Saginaw said Weinstein thought he had clout. If he does, he won't be canceled. Quite the reverse. Quite the reverse. Okay, so what else do we have in stupid news? Well, let's talk about science. Let's talk about math. Things are changing. Big changes happening in math. Cassandra, a.k.a. Michael J. Burry, tweets, Bill Gates' money says white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when 1. Real world math is valued over math in the real world. Ooh. Often the emphasis is placed on learning math in the real world as if our classrooms are not a part of the real world. This reinforces notions of either or thinking because math is only seen as useful when it is a particular context. However, this can result in using mathematics to uphold capitalist and imperialist ways of being and understandings of the world. White supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when often the emphasis is placed on learning math. Yeah, okay, sorry. I thought that I was going forward, but here we go. White supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when teachers are teachers and students are learners. Unique to mathematics is the idea that new learning comes from the teacher. That is in no way unique to mathematics. Even when learning is connected to previous knowledge and experiences, the idea is often that teachers provide the learning and are in charge of disseminating new information. This reinforces the ideas of paternalism and power hoarding. That last neologism is certainly new to me. When students bring a different approach to doing math, teachers often get defensive and see it as a challenge to the power structures in the classroom. Yes, the power structures that it doesn't work unless you sit down, shut up, keep still, and only speak when you're spoken to. White supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when the focus is on getting the right answer, scare quotes in the original. The concept of mathematics being purely objective is unequivocally false, and teaching it is even much less so. Upholding the idea that there are always right and wrong answers perpetuate objectivity as well as fear of open conflict. Objectivity as opposed to subjectivity, as opposed to I don't like you just because. And finally, white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when grading practices are focused on lack of knowledge. Grades are traditionally indicative of what students can't do rather than what they can do. Isn't this sort of a glass half full, half empty kind of thing? You get an A, well, that would seem to indicate what you can do. You get an F, that would seem to indicate what you can't do. Anyway, this reinforces perfectionism. In addition, math teachers also focus grades on what is more easily measurable. I wonder why that might be. Rather than the knowledge that we want students to have, reinforcing quantity over quality, and often evaluating procedural or skills-based knowledge rather than conceptual knowledge, as in 2 + 2 equals, well, I've got a concept in my head. I'm not really able to quantify that or qualify it, but I do have the concept. Again, once again, I see these things and I think, well, obviously, it's parody, right? I mean, the font and the colors, they certainly look official, but this must be a parody. But no, it's not a parody. This is from Barry Weiss's Substack, and it's a piece by Sergio Kleinerman. There is no such thing as white math. I naively believed that STEM would be spared from the ideological takeover. I was wrong, says the Princeton professor. Yes, in my profession as a professor of mathematics at Princeton, I've witnessed the decline of universities and cultural institutions as they have embraced political ideology at the expense of rigorous scholarship. Until recently, this past summer, really, I had naively thought that the STEM disciplines would be spared from this ideological takeover. I was wrong. Attempts to deconstruct mathematics, deny its objectivity, accuse it of racial bias, and infuse it with political ideology have become more and more common, perhaps even at your child's elementary school. This phenomenon is part of what has been dubbed the Great Awakening. No, that's not your dialect, Professor. Check your privilege. As others have explained powerfully, the ideology incubated in academia where it indoctrinated plenty of bright minds. It then migrated through those true believers into our important cultural, religious, and political institutions. Now it is affecting some of the country's most prominent businesses. Helen Andrews talks about this in her book, Boomers, which I'm going to be discussing on the book club on Friday. She says the solution to this is fewer people going into post-secondary education, that you typically see the most strident wokism from the stupider students who are not confident in what they have learned in their intellectual ability or attainment. So they need to stand out somehow. And how do you get to stand out these days? By being the loudest idiot around. Of course, part of it also has to do with these people are dimly aware that they are putting themselves tens of thousands of dollars into debt for degrees that are practically useless. In any event, the professor continues, unlike the traditional totalitarianism practiced by former communist countries like the Romania I grew up in, this version is soft. It enforces its ideology not by jailing dissenters, not yet, or physically eliminating them, not yet, but by social shaming, mob punishment, guilt by association, and coerced speech. When it comes to education, I believe the woke ideology is even more harmful than old-fashioned communism. Communism had a strong sense of objective reality anchored in the belief that humans are capable of discovering universal truths. It forcefully asserted, in fact, the absolute truth of dialectical materialism as revealed by its founders, Marx, Engels, and Lenin. Communist ideology held science and mathematics in the highest regard, even though it often distorted the former for doctrinal reasons. Mathematics was largely immune to ideological pressure and thus thrived in most communist countries. Being skilled in math was a source of great societal prestige for school children, and it was a great equalizer. Those from socioeconomically disadvantaged families had a chance to compete on equal footing with those from privileged ones. The woke ideology treats both science and mathematics as social constructs and condemns the way they are practiced in research and teaching as manifestations of white supremacy, Eurocentrism, and post-colonialism. Take, for example, the recent educational program called A Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction. The program is backed financially by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It counts among its partners the Lawrence Hall of Science at UC Berkeley, the California Math Project, the Association of California School Administrators, and the Los Angeles County Office of Education, among others, and it was recently sent to Oregon teachers by the state's Department of Education. The program argues that white supremacy culture shows up in the classroom when the focus is on getting the right answer, or when students are required to show their work, while stipulating that the very concept of mathematics being purely objective is unequivocally false. The main goal of the program is to dismantle racism in mathematics instruction with the expressly political aim of engaging, quote, the socio-political turn in all aspects of education, including mathematics, unquote. In the past, I would have said that such statements should be ignored as too radical and absurd to merit refutation, but recent trends across the country suggest that we no longer have that luxury. So let me state the following for the record. Nothing in the history and current practice of mathematics justifies the notion that it is in any way different or dependent on the particular race or ethnic group engaged in it. For historical reasons, we often discuss contributions to the field of mathematics from the Egyptians, Babylonians, Greeks, Chinese, Indians, and Arabs, and refer to them as distinct entities. They have all contributed through a unique cultural dialogue to the creation of a truly magnificent edifice accessible today to every man and woman on the planet. Though we pay tribute to great historical figures who inform the practice of mathematics, the subject can be taught, and often is, with no reference to the individuals who have contributed to it. In that sense, it is uniquely universal. I'm not so sure that I agree about this part. I was talking about magical thinking earlier. Africa is, to a very large extent, dominated by magical thinking. If magical thinking is identified with sub-Saharan Africa and Black Lives Matter, well, then I suppose mathematics and other so-called objective sciences, or the very idea of science itself, is racist. Is not the witch doctor a scientist? And we may be seeing that come to American schools soon enough. You may have noticed over the past few decades a great deal of attention and respect devoted to the practice of voodoo. And one of the reasons that McNeil and the New York Times got into so much trouble with the spoiled brats from the prep schools in Peru was apparently he was dismissive of the efficacy of Indian shamans in South America. And anyway, the Princeton professor concludes, the idea that focusing on getting the right answer is now considered among some self-described progressives as a form of bias or racism is offensive and extraordinarily dangerous. The entire study of mathematics is based on clearly formulated definitions and statements of fact. If this were not so, bridges would collapse, planes would fall from the sky, and bank transactions would be impossible. Well, that may be coming too. If we really all believed in objectivity, then affirmative action would not exist, would it? Certainly not after decades and decades with no end in sight. In any event, the professor concludes, there's no such thing as white mathematics. There is no reason to assume, as the activists do, that minority kids are not capable of mathematics or of finding the right answers. And there could be no justification for, in the name of equity or anything else, depriving students of the rigorous education that they need to succeed. The real anti-racists will stand up and oppose this nonsense. Yeah, what's a real anti-racist? I just a rigorous education that they need to succeed. There's not very many Americans or Canadians or Britons that get a rigorous education anymore. From the very beginning, just incredible amount of time is wasted in schools. It's a cliche to point out that university graduates now have a deplorable lack of understanding of the history of the world, of other countries in the world, of other cultures, or the most basic facts about their civilization. I don't mean to sound gloomy, but this battle was lost in the 1960s and early 70s when universities said, oh, we're going to have Black studies departments, we're going to have women's studies departments, we're going to have queer studies departments, et cetera, et cetera. And they believed that they could somehow fence this off from the rest of the academy. Let's go back to the chat here. Steve says public school's bad and getting worse. Well, what we've seen, there may have been, something of a reversal in New York City with that fellow. What was his name? Carranza being fired. But, to the extent that white students have any interest in large cities in America of having their children in public schools, and the same goes for Asians, they're looking for these magnet schools or special schools. And of course, now we have the demand that this kind of specialness or high achievement is, wait for it, racist. And if you select based on merit, and you look at the demographics, and let's say one particular group does not show up very well, we know that this is disparate impact, and disparate impact is racist. There doesn't need to be any plan for it to be racist. There doesn't need to be any hostility. It's just the numbers. And the numbers show that certain people don't do as well as others, and this is, it's white supremacism, apparently, even when Asians benefit. Heckma Warrior says, glad to be here. Came from PBS NewsHour. Nauseated. Chokokin666 says, this is all sheer decadence. It is decadence in the true meaning of the word, which means a decline in standards. Dan Allison, that entire piece of writing is disingenuous horse shit. Tricky Who says neo-Bolsheviks obviously believe they have us in checkmate, hence the Kuflu global. I'm not going to complete that sentence. We stand together, or yes, we get taken one by one. Steve says, I don't want to fly in a plane constructed with anti-racist engineering. Gamayan says, why was my message deleted? I don't know. I don't know what message that's referring to. Okay, all maths were stolen from Wakanda, says Glib Medley, and we may be hearing that soon enough. No joke. Apparently, there's a fair number of people in the United States who believe that Wakanda is real. Steve says disparate impact is one of the worst legal doctrines America ever adopted. Mrs. Assad said Asians lost their people of color special status. That seems to be in flux. We know that blacks and Asians are not getting along in the United States. They have not got along for quite some time, but apparently this is the fault of white people or Donald Trump, amazingly. Yep. Everything bad. It's Donald Trump's fault. He is the Emmanuel Goldstein of our age. The book that I talked about last Friday, COVID-19, The Great Reset, made to me the risible argument that we might see an explosion of artistic creativity following the devastation caused by the pandemic. Well, Sir Kazuo Ishiguro doesn't seem to be as optimistic. This is from the BBC. Young authors may be self-censoring because they worry they will be trolled or cancelled, according to the celebrated writer Sir Kazuo Ishiguro. Sir Kazuo, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2017, warned that a climate of fear was preventing some people from writing what they want. He said they may be concerned that an anonymous lynch mob will turn up online and make their lives a misery. He told the BBC, "I very much fear for the younger generation of writers." The 66-year-old said that he was worried that less established authors were self-censoring by avoiding writing from certain viewpoints or including characters outside their immediate experiences. "I admit that is a dangerous state of affairs," added the acclaimed author, whose works include The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go. He said he was particularly troubled about young writers who rightly perhaps feel that their careers are more fragile, their reputations are more fragile, and they don't want to take risks. His comments come after a number of freedom of speech disputes, is that what we're calling it? With writers being canceled or facing threats to boycott their work. High-profile targets have included J.K. Rowling, Julie Burchill, and Janine Cummins. Sir Kazuo, however, who received a knighthood in 2019, said he was not worried about being canceled. "I think I'm in a privileged and relatively protected position because I'm a very established author," he said. "I'm the age I am. I have a reputation. Perhaps it's an illusion, but I think I'm protected." Well, I suppose we shall see. The author, who was born in Nagasaki, Japan, but moved to England when he was 5, insisted there was no subject or viewpoint he would shrink back from. "Novelists should feel free to write from whichever viewpoint they wish or represent all kinds of views," he said. "Right from an early age, I've written from the point of view of people very different from myself. My first novel was written from the point of view of a woman." "I think there are very valid parts of this argument about appropriation of voice," he added, saying he believes we do have the obligation to teach ourselves and do research and to treat people with respect if we're going to have them feature in our work. He said there must be decency towards people outside of our own immediate experience. "However, if I shrink back from something, it's because I would doubt my ability to be able to learn enough about it to write fairly about it. But I tend to be quite arrogant about my ability to learn about things if I put my mind to it." I'm thinking of that movie by Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing. How much does Spike Lee know about, Italians in New York City? Have he made much of a study of them, a formal study? I'm not arguing that he should have, or that there's anything wrong with the film because he didn't. I'm just saying Spike Lee, he wrote and directed a film. Yeah, I know Italians in New York City, so I'm going to make a film in which they play a large part. That's the way that it used to be. I am not for a moment saying that it should be any different, but apparently that doesn't work in reverse. "Oh, what do you know about Black people?" Well, I suppose anyone who lived in New York City would have their observations to go by. And I don't know, contra, say, Tom Wolfe, the vast, vast majority of novels are based on personal observation, not on detailed study. Oh, yes. More madness from Washington. So QAnon, apparently it's, it's a vast conspiracy theory and it's exceedingly dangerous, but it's also completely loopy. No one would believe in any of it, right? And yet we get this from the Sun, the London Sun. U.S. Capitol on high alert as QAnon followers push conspiracy theory Trump will be made president in 3 days. Ay, ay, ay. Thousands of National Guard troops will remain in Washington over fears QAnon's claim may lead to another attack on the U.S. Capitol. What, they're going to take on 4,500 armed soldiers? Are they? After followers spoke of a military investigation into President Joe Biden. The request for 4,900 National Guard troops to continue their deployments in Washington until March 12th was made by U.S. Capitol Police. We work very closely with the FBI, Secret Service, and others, and the Capitol Police to try to determine what they believe that threat is, and then looking at what they believe is the need for the National Guard, or the types of mission sets that they need support from. We work very closely with them to try to determine what that is. The baseless claim is just the latest peddled by the QAnon crowd, who have been spreading baseless conspiracy theories to millions worldwide over the past few years. March 4th has become the latest date in which the QAnon conspiracy storm is swirling around as proponents believe Trump will somehow be reinstalled as president. Who or what is QAnon? Tucker Carlson was talking about the other day, and he was ridiculed. I don't know who or what QAnon is. There are various people who claim to speak for QAnon or to interpret QAnon, but I've been reading in the gossip columns for some months claims that QAnon was sold some months ago to people who attempted to monetize it and failed. I don't know whether that is true or not. This is from USA Today. Boy Scouts of America plan to exit bankruptcy, would pay abuse survivors an average of $6,000 each. Survivors object. And yeah, let's do the Control F search here. And what is a word that doesn't appear in this story, huh? Could you guess what that might be? Gay. Doesn't appear in the story. No, they're just homosexual. This is... Okay, so Boy Scouts of America decide to end their discrimination against homosexual scoutmasters, and they go bankrupt because of sexual assault claims. Who could have seen that coming, eh? Boy Scouts of America is proposing to pay roughly $220 million toward a trust to compensate tens of thousands of former members who say they were abused as scouts. Another $300 million may come from a voluntary contribution from local councils, the Boy Scouts said in court documents filed Monday, but the local organizations have given no formal commitment. The number is a fraction of the $1 billion of the organization's estimated value and a sliver of the value of its subsidiaries, including local councils, as well as various trusts and endowments, which USA Today estimates could exceed $3.7 million. The proposal is part of a reorganization plan put forth by the nonprofit, detailing how it intends to handle the massive child sex abuse case that's threatening its existence, the largest ever involving a single national organization, and emerge as a viable entity. It comes a little more than a year after Boy Scouts filed for bankruptcy in federal court in Delaware. At the time, the organization said it faced 275 lawsuits in state and federal courts, plus another 1,400 potential claims. Nearly 95,000 claims were filed by the November deadline set by the bankruptcy judge. Yeah. When we hear discussions of the child sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church, somehow this word gay or homosexual is not used, despite the findings of the John Jay report into it, which made it very clear who the predators were. But we don't want to hurt any feelings. This is from the Daily Mail. Jack Newman. Orders for HIV tests triple thanks to success of Russell T. Davis's 1980s gay drama, It's a Sin, Channel 4 says. It's a Sin followed a group of gay men navigating the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 1980s. The show's success prompted a surge in testing orders and calls to helplines. The series release coincided with the National HIV Testing Week in February. What are we supposed to feel nostalgia for the AIDS crisis of the 1980s, which we were told which was everyone's problem, but was not in fact everyone's problems. I don't think that the people behind this story, they seem to think that this is some sort of a win here, that the association of homosexuality with HIV/AIDS is not, in fact, a good look. Okay, let's talk about Britain for a little while. This is from Paul Joseph Watson. People in the UK continue to be arrested for COVID violations, such as walking too far from their homes, while knife crime surges. Yeah. I saw footage of military helicopters being dispatched within the last day or so, looking for people walking in the country. Yeah. I asked the question last week, what is the military for? Well, apparently one of its reasons is to hunt down people walking in the country. I've spoken previously of a prominent British intellectual called Nick Cohen, who seems like a really nasty man. This is from Unity News Network, Neil McRae. It is only a matter of time before we turn on the unvaccinated. So declared the lead column in The Observer yesterday. Nick Cohen has been an enthusiast for lockdown and for censorship of skeptics. But his latest invective may be seen as inciting the lynch mob. Like other COVID-19 zealots, Cohen must realize that opposition to the experimental vaccines and the proposed health passport is growing. Perhaps in desperation, last week the Queen's influence was brought to bear by the establishment, although describing the hesitant as selfish did not sound like her choice of words. The new strategy is to portray those who decline the jab as stubbornly and stupidly holding the country back. According to Cohen, quote, rational people will ask why they should continue to accept restrictions on their freedoms because of ignorant delusions, unquote. This turns the argument about lockdown upside down. People who always wanted to carry on as normal and who regard masks and vaccines as an overreaction and now blame for the loss of liberties. Cohen continued in his manipulative manner, quote, to make it personal, how would you feel if someone you love contracted cancer and the National Health Service delayed treatment because it had to look after needlessly ill COVID patients, unquote. Here is a dedicated man of the left suggesting that the NHS should deny life-saving care rather than serving all. Could you imagine, before the COVID-19 tyranny, Cohen arguing that smokers with lung cancer should be allowed to deprive care from other patients? The term vaccine apartheid was used not as a dire warning, but as a desirable way of outcasting those who refuse to accept vaccination for a disease. The article was replete with condescending narrative about Black and minority ethnic communities, which have low uptake of the vaccine. While passing comment on extreme religious elites who allegedly control Blacks and Muslims, Cohen castigated the upper middle class white men who are responsible for dangerous disinformation. Laying to the likes of Piers Corbyn and Toby Young is a pleasure as much as a journalistic duty, Cohen wrote. This was published on the day when Corbyn was arrested for the umpteenth time on this occasion for speaking to a small crowd on his candidacy for mayor of London. After years of complaining about lack of democracy in Russia and other supposedly rogue nations, Cohen had nothing to say about this criminalizing of normal electioneering. I alerted Toby Young soon after this missive went online. Cohen had already blamed the Lockdown Skeptics editor for the death of a man in Shropshire who had followed various skeptical websites before dying from the disease. Young found the article extraordinary as he had previously thought of Cohen as a reasonable and moderate writer. While I admire Toby's tolerance, it is not reciprocated by Cohen and never will be. I was less surprised, having recently researched Cohen's contribution to the Integrity Initiative, a government-funded organization that sets out to vilify populist or radical figures. Cohen was a persistent critic of Jeremy Corbyn, Julian Assange, and Aaron Banks, going beyond journalism to portray these men as enemies of society. This hideously divisive Observer column takes Cohen to a sociopathic level of pro-establishment dirty work. He anticipates a purge and probably dreams of show trials for the double-faulting Brexiteers and vaccine skeptics. how he would enjoy that. Well, as suggested in that column, people like Cohen, they've run into a rather delicate problem, because the highest level of resistance to or refusing to get vaccines comes from the so-called BIPOC people, or BAME, as they call them in the United Kingdom, and Black Asian, Middle East. According to Kurt Zidulka at Breitbart, nearly 1/4 of frontline NHS staff in London have so far refused to take a vaccine for the coronavirus, figures from the NHS have revealed. Throughout the country, some 91% of frontline healthcare workers have taken the coronavirus vaccine. However, in London, only 76% have taken the jab, despite all staff members being offered one, the Sunday Times reported. The joint chief nurse for the NHS in London, Martin McRae, said that NHS London will be translating videos about the coronavirus vaccine into commonly spoken languages in the capital besides English, in order to combat supposed misinformation spreading among certain groups. There have been growing concerns over the slow uptake of the coronavirus vaccines among so-called BAME, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities within the UK, spreading fears that the country may see pockets of infection as it tries to lift lockdown restrictions. And here's a tweet, from last year. Sadiq Khan demands minorities get preferential access to corona vaccines. It appears that they're just not so keen on it, which again, it's a delicate problem. Masks. Again from Breitbart, Victoria Friedman. Susan Hopkins, a specialist in infectious diseases at Public Health England, said that Britons should wear masks made with at least 2 or even 3 layers, and left open the possibility that the UK might follow the US's lead and recommend double masking. The British government made wearing masks or any kind of face covering in shops mandatory in July 2020, with the government advising that they be made with at least 2 layers of fabric. Funny, I don't remember hearing that last summer. Responding to a question on U.S. President Joe Biden double masking, Dr. Hopkins said during a Downing Street press briefing on Monday, the more layers you have, the better. That's grossly irresponsible. We're going to have people suffocating. The more, the better. This woman is a physician, or is she a nurse or a physician? That, how about 4? How about 5 layers? How about not being able to breathe at all? Let's see. Hopkins then appeared to suggest that double masking could be coming to the UK, describing discussions about mask regulations as ongoing. We think that one mask that has more than 2 layers in it is currently effective for the vast majority of the population. The recommendations come as another health expert said that joggers should wear a mask while undertaking their vigorous exercises outside, claiming that runners' heavy breathing could put other people at risk. So I remember this from last summer. Oh my God, it's the joggers. The joggers are going to kill us. Then we stopped hearing that, but now they're back. Masks are mandated only in certain enclosed public spaces, such as on public transport or in shops, but Oxford University's Trish Greenhalgh told Good Morning Britain on Tuesday, the exercising jogger, the puffing and panting jogger, you can feel their breath come, and you can sometimes actually feel yourself inhaling. So there's no doubt that there is a danger there. I have never heard their breath come, and I've never felt myself inhaling it. What's going on in this woman's head? The debate over where masks should be worn has become a controversial topic in Britain's halls of powers, with former Brexit Party MEP and peer on the House of Lords Claire Fox, now Baroness Fox of Buckley, calling the recommendation that children wear masks in schools clearly nonsensical and detrimental to learning. Okay. Andrew Cuomo, still governor of the state of New York. And I'm looking at a picture of him. This is from John Nolte at Breitbart. And there are 4 other Democratic governors, including the curiously rubber-faced Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. Nolte writes, in a just world not plagued by a fake and corrupt media, Andrew Cuomo would be on the edge of resigning his office today, not over a handful of times he allegedly got aggressive with women, but over his sociopathic executive order that required nursing homes to accept patients still infected with the coronavirus. That, after all, is the real scandal here, the true scandal, an act so monstrous Cuomo knew he had to cover it up, which he did by falsely blaming the order on the Trump administration and then lying about just how many seniors died as a result. Yes, he also had the order removed from the official New York State government website. But instead of being pressured to resign over that, he's being hit with perfectly timed allegations of sexual misconduct, 2 involving former staffers, 1 involving a complete stranger he met at a wedding. As these things go, while his alleged behavior is inappropriate, especially in the workplace, it's nothing compared to the credible allegations against Joe Biden. So what's going on? Why is America's corrupt media not at all interested in some 15,000 dead senior citizens while they tar and feather Cuomo over the allegations he made 3 left-wing women uncomfortable? The answer is obvious. 4 other Democrat governors issued the same sociopathic nursing home order as Cuomo. 4 other Democrats ordered infected coronavirus patients be admitted into nursing home facilities where 1, the most vulnerable, live, and 2, they're not set up to handle an infectious virus. What this means is that if the corrupt media were to do the right thing, like that will ever happen, and go after Cuomo over his deadly nursing home policy, it would open up a Pandora's box against these 4 Democrat governors and the Democrat Party as a whole. Democrats must be protected at all costs, even if the cost is thousands of lives. Here's the rundown from my colleague Wendell Husbo. Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan issued an order that a long-term care facility must not prohibit admission or readmission of a resident based on COVID-19 testing requirements or results. The policy was renewed 3 times before being rescinded in July 2020. Governor Gavin Newsom of California ordered on April 10, 2020, that patients hospitalized and receiving treatment at an alternate care site with COVID-19 can be discharged to a skilled nursing facility when clinically indicated. Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey approved a directive from State Health Commissioner Judith Persicilli that no patient could be denied admission or readmission to a nursing home solely based on a confirmed diagnosis of COVID-19. And Governor Tom Wolf of Pennsylvania enacted a mandatory admission policy in March, saying nursing care facilities must continue to accept new admissions and receive readmissions for current residents who have been discharged from the hospital who are stable. Only Democrats in the fake media, Nolte writes, that shields them would be okay with closing schools where there's little to no risk while pouring infection into nursing homes where everyone's at risk. In some good news, Texas has now been opened up. The restrictions are over in Texas, and the mask mandate is over. Oh, more about masks. Caitlin Bennett tweeted, on the first day of CPAC, I called out Jim Acosta of CNN for only wearing 1 mask against the advice of his beloved Dr. Fauci, so he came back the next day wearing 2. That's how easy it is. It's really that simple. In my own country of Canada, in the province of Ontario, Ontario MPP Randy Hillier, who has been ejected from the Progressive Conservative Caucus, was suspended from Twitter, and he's likely to be permanently banned because of statements that he's made about COVID-19. And let's go to Lockdown Skeptics, which is compiled today by Connor Chaplin. The link between infections and deaths has been broken. Health Secretary Matt Hancock struck an upbeat tone at the daily press conference yesterday, where he announced that a single dose of either the AstraZeneca or Pfizer jab reduces risk of hospitalization in the over 80s by 80%. So, yeah. So when is this all going to end? I don't take any particular stand on what I'm going to say next. I fully understand why he did it. Peter Hitchens, one of the earliest of the UK's small band of skeptical journalists, used his weekly conversation with Mike Graham on talk radio to discuss the mixed reaction to his Mail on Sunday column, in which he revealed he had had his first COVID jab. He wrote, "Of course, my selfish injection didn't hurt. I'm a blood donor, so also please don't call me selfish. Used to far bigger needles in my arm for a lot longer. I did feel a pang of regret and loss. For me, the vaccination was a gloomy submission to a new world of excessive safety and regulation. I tried to fight against it, but I lost. The new Jerusalem, in which we allow the state to boss us around even more in the name of our own good, is now coming into being. And so we are just going to be under surveillance a lot more, recorded a lot more, and bossed about a lot more." Hitchens had weighed up the pros and cons and concluded that nearing 70 and with part of his family abroad, who he had been prevented from seeing for over a year, resisting the coming vaccine passport system was unwinnable. In response, he was deluged with accusations of capitulation on social media yesterday. Anyone who has listened much to Hitchens for the last year will know that he has said very little about the vaccine and certainly never said whether he would or wouldn't take it, nor discouraged anyone else from taking it. Despite what YouTube may have think, I have never discouraged anyone from taking the virus either. I have merely pointed out something to do with one of the vaccines and risk of miscarriage. So Hitchens wrote, "You can't lead where there's nothing much behind you. I've worked day and night, before breakfast, before lunch, before supper, into the evening, day after day after day, trying to make the case against this folly for 11 long months, sometimes very nearly totally alone in my trade. I resent very much anyone who suggests that I didn't put my all into it or that I didn't believe in it. But I don't think that there has been a sufficient resistance at time when it could have been any use. People wake up now and say, oh gosh, this is all a terrible mistake. Where were they? Particularly in my own trade, but in general, where were they in the months of March, April, and June? Where were they in Parliament, in the law, when some difference could have been made and this could have been stopped? They weren't anywhere to be seen. It's no good turning on me now and saying, actually, we have failed. I didn't fail. I kept on, but I'm just not going to pretend that you can carry on and on fighting a battle with nobody behind you against an enormously powerful, immensely rich enemy who simply turns a steamroller on you. I've been steamrollered. It's an experience I'm horribly used to." He turned his exasperation on would-be members of the resistance who remained silent, saying, "There are people in this country, not like me, a lot of people I just don't appeal to, but commentators who instantly, if they take up a cause, attract a powerful following, and I'd name two of those among them, Douglas Murray and Charles, now Lord Moore. These were voices which, in my view, if they'd spoken out against this, could have changed the whole tendency of things, but among so many others, they looked on it as spectators. They didn't see it as their cause." Yes, the mortality risk of COVID-19 is dying out. COVID Lockdown Skeptics is publishing an original paper by Howard Green that looks at the diminishing risk of dying from COVID-19 and argues that it's now within the normal range Americans are typically prepared to live with, and for that reason, restrictions should be lifted. Howard's credentials cover 40 years of working in the medical technology field for both large and small companies. He is the co-inventor of the monoclonal antibody sandwich assay, which is today the standard clinical chemistry method for measuring proteins, including the test for the SARS-CoV-2 antigen. Government's notorious 1 in 3 propaganda line doesn't square with ONS data. Yes, around 1 in 3 people with COVID-19 have no symptoms. You could be spreading it without knowing it. This claim has been made, and obviously the purpose of the claim is to terrify people. But where is the evidence for it? And finally, on this topic, I'm going to see what Alex Berenson has to say, and I await the decision on whether Amazon is going to sell his book on COVID-19, which is to be published by Regnery. James Surowicki tweeted, "A lot of Texans are now going to be in the running to be the last person to die for a mistake." Berenson comments, "Welcome to the final flutter of panic from the Team Apocalypse stalwarts who have learned absolutely zero since last March. One colorful change since last spring is that the panic porn has become far less colorful. Remember the stories about people with hundreds of clots in their lungs or healthy 20-somethings having strokes? I think that stuff was just too fictional to last." And okay, anything else here? Okay, no. Time to move on to James Burnham. Robert Michels, The Iron Law of Oligarchy. The autocratic tendencies of organization have not, of course, escaped the notice of those proponents of democracy who have been both hard-headed and sincere. Recognizing them, a number of measures have been proposed in an effort to thwart these tendencies and to guard democracy. Michels discusses the result obtained from four of the chief of these: the referendum, renunciation, syndicalism, and anarchism. The device of the referendum has been tried both in government bodies, Switzerland, certain states of the United States, and since this book was written, quite a few times significantly in Canada, and in many lesser organizations. In theory, it serves to refer policy-making decisions to the entire membership of the group, and thus to operate in accordance with strict democratic principle. In practice, we find that it does not work. Usually only a small percentage of the membership participates in the referendum. It is easy for the leaders to put the referendum question in such a form as to assure the outcome that they wish. The referendum is open to criticism to the same extent or for the same reasons as is any other form of direct popular government. The two principal objections are the incompetence of the masses and the lack of time. Bernstein has said, with good reason, that even if none but the most important political and administrative questions are to be submitted to the popular vote, the happy citizen of the future will find every Sunday upon his desk such a number of interrogations that he will soon lose all enthusiasm for the referendum. It is, however, especially in respect of questions demanding a prompt decision that the referendum proves impracticable. We have already noted that these questions which demand prompt decision are just those that are most crucial in determining the fate of organizations. The so-called Ludlow Amendment, strongly advocated in the 1930s in the United States, which provided for a referendum vote of the people before this country could go to war, was certainly a consistent application of democratic principle. The pretended arguments against it on the basis of democracy were either ignorant or hypocritical. Nevertheless, it was plainly ridiculous from the point of view of practice. A war was not going to wait for the conclusion of the unwieldy and elaborate mechanics of a general referendum. Indeed, the real, as distinguished from the formal meaning of the agitation for the Ludlow Amendment, had nothing to do with democracy, but was a struggle against the impending war and against the then existing administration. The most conspicuous use of the referendum, it may be observed, is the Bonapartist plebiscite. Hitler, Stalin, Nasser, and de Gaulle have followed the two Napoleons, where the vote attaches the fiction of the popular will to what has already been decided in historical fact. By renunciation, Michels refers to a device that has been frequently advocated for working-class organizations and sometimes enforced by them. Reasoning that the anti-democratic habits of leaders follow from their possession of material privileges beyond those available to the rank of file, it is held that these tendencies will disappear if the privileges are made inaccessible, if the leaders are required to have the same income, conditions of life, social and cultural environment as the members. It is certainly a fact that there is a most intimate connection between power and privilege. Nevertheless, the device of renunciation fails in practice. In the first place, except sometimes in small or persecuted organizations, the leaders never do renounce all privileges, and they can find very plausible excuses in both the nature and quality of their work for not doing so. Even where they do, renunciation does not produce simple democrats, but fanatics, often more tyrannical than those leaders who are sometimes mellowed a little by privilege. Third, the syndicalist policy aims to defend democracy. As we have seen, syndicalism, noting the anti-democratic tendencies of the state and of political parties, tells the workers to have nothing to do with politics, but to confine themselves altogether to their own organizations, the trade unions, syndicates, and the labor cooperatives. The naivete of this proposal is apparent enough. Trade unions and cooperatives are not exempt from the autocratic tendencies of organizations, are rather prime sources of these tendencies. Getting rid of political parties would not at all get rid of autocracy, but merely leave the union autocracy a field free of rivals. Anarchism, finally, which was the first movement to study in detail the autocratic tendencies of organization, draws the clearest and most formally consistent conclusion. Since all organization leads to autocracy, then, in order to achieve democracy, there must be no organization at all, neither state nor party nor union. This viewpoint, which the history of anarchism shows is capable of producing very noble human individuals, is wholly divorced from the reality of human society, which necessarily includes organizations. Anarchism, therefore, can never be more than a faith, and a completely unrealistic faith, able to integrate an individual's own isolated life, but never a serious political movement. Anarchists are compelled, when they try to put their ideas into social practice, to accept organization. They ordinarily do so in the economic field, and even, though they disguise it, among themselves. But though the anarchist leaders are, as a rule, morally superior to the leaders of the organized parties working in the political field, we find in them some of the qualities and pretensions characteristic of all leadership. This is proved by a psychological analysis of the characteristics of the individual anarchist leader. The theoretical struggle has not stifled in them the natural love of power. All that we can say is that the means of dominion employed by the anarchist leader belong to an epoch which the political parties have already outlived. These are the means utilized by the apostle and the orator, the flaming power of thought, greatness of self-sacrifice, profundity of conviction. Their dominion is exercised not over the organization, but over minds. It is the outcome not of technical indispensability, but of intellectual ascendancy and moral superiority. It is not surprising, James Burnham writes, that the test of experience shows that these and all other devices fail. Social life cannot dispense with organization. The mechanical, technical, psychological, and cultural conditions of organization require leadership and guarantee that the leaders, rather than the mass, shall exercise control. The autocratic tendencies are neither arbitrary nor accidental nor temporary, but inherent in the nature of organization. This, the general conclusion from Mickle's entire study, he sums up as the iron law of oligarchy, a law which, upon the basis of the evidence at our disposal, would seem to hold for all social movements and all forms of society. The law shows that the democratic ideal of self-government is impossible. Whatever social changes occur, whatever happens to economic relations, whether property is in private hands or socialized, the organization will remain, and through organization, an oligarchical rule will be perpetuated. Mickles writes, the social revolution would not effect any real modification of the internal structure of the mass. The socialists might conquer, but not socialism, which would perish in the moment of its adherents' triumph. These phenomena would seem to prove beyond dispute that society cannot exist without a dominant or political class, and that the ruling class, whilst its elements are subject to a frequent partial renewal, nevertheless constitutes the only factor of sufficiently durable efficacy in the history of human development. According to this view, the government, or, if the phrase be preferred, the state, cannot be anything other than the organization of a minority. It is the aim of this minority to impose upon the rest of society a legal order, which is the outcome of exigencies of dominion and of the exploitation of the mass of helots, affected by the ruling minority, and can never be truly representative of the majority. The majority is thus permanently incapable of self-government. The majority of human beings in a condition of eternal tutelage are predestined by tragic necessity to submit to the dominion of a small minority and must be content to constitute the pedestal of an oligarchy, unquote. Burnham comments, however, from the iron law of oligarchy, Mickles does not at all conclude that we should abandon the struggle for democracy, or more strictly, for a reduction to the minimum possible of those autocratic tendencies which will nevertheless always remain. Mickles writes, leadership is a necessary phenomenon in every form of social life. Consequently, it is not the task of science to inquire whether this phenomenon is good or evil, or predominantly one or the other. But there is great scientific value in the demonstration that every system of leadership is incompatible with the most essential postulates of democracy. We are now aware that the law of the historic necessity of oligarchy is primarily based upon a series of facts of experience. The mass will never rule except in abstracto. Consequently, the question is not whether ideal democracy is realizable, but rather to what point and what degree democracy is desirable, possible, and realizable at a given moment. Oligarchy will always remain. It may be possible to put some limit and restraint on the absoluteness of oligarchy. This cannot be effectively done by a utopian and sentimental idealism concerning the possibilities of democracy. According to Mickles, nothing but a serene and frank examination of the oligarchical dangers of a democracy will enable us to minimize these dangers, even though they can never be entirely avoided. Those alone, perhaps, are in a position to pass a fair judgment upon democracy who, without lapsing into dilettantist sentimentalism, recognize that all scientific and human ideals have relative values. If we wish to estimate the value of democracy, we must do so in comparison with its converse, pure aristocracy. The defects inherent in democracy are obvious. It is nonetheless true that as a form of social life, we must choose democracy as the least of evils. Democracy is a treasure which no one will ever discover by deliberate search, but in continuing our search and laboring indefatigably to discover the undiscoverable, we will perform a work which will have fertile results in the democratic sense. Mickles concludes, the democratic currents of history resemble successive waves. They break ever on the same shoal. They are ever renewed. This enduring spectacle is simultaneously encouraging and depressing. When democracies have gained a certain stage of development, they undergo a gradual transformation, adopting the aristocratic spirit, and in many cases also the aristocratic forms, against which at the outset they struggled so fiercely. Now, new accusers arise to denounce the traitors. After an era of glorious combats and of inglorious power, they end by fusing with the old dominant class, whereupon once more they are in their turn attacked by fresh opponents who appeal to the name of democracy. It is probable that this cruel game will continue without end. And tomorrow we begin to consider Wilfredo Pareto and the nature of social action. Let's talk about a particular form of American oligarchy. But before I do that, I will go to the chat. Oh dear. What are we're talking about sperm here? Hickman Warrior says Burnham was a courageous fellow, sharp. Indeed, he was a full professor of philosophy at New York University at the age of 25, which is quite impressive. Indeed, impossible to have a democracy controlled by a malignant oligarchy. Well, we'll talk about elites, alternative elites, a little later, and this is one of the things which has led to the current crisis in the United States, because the regnant elite in the United States has insisted for some time that there is no alternative elite which can be allowed to exist. People saw right from the very beginning how the so-called deep state, or the bureaucracy, or whatever you want to call them, sabotaged President Donald Trump on every conceivable level, with the U.S. military going so far as to lie to him about the number of American troops stationed abroad, constantly leaking to the media, making stories up, leaking them to the media, and the media quoting them. Oh, and we have facts now. Thus, we got Russiagate and Ukraine Gate. Oh, and then we see that, yes, under Presidents Bush and Obama, we had so-called children in cages. But it was only with Donald Trump that this was an outrage. Well, he's not president anymore. And guess what? Biden has children in cages. No. But they're not cages. Oh, they're not? Oh, they're detention facilities or some such. Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that makes all of the difference. When we talk about people being in cages, when we talk about adults being in cages, we are, with very few exceptions, using a metaphor. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about internships. And apparently, people in the media and elsewhere, I find it shocking that people would be upset by the prospect of asking to work for free. Yeah. And working pretty hard, I would guess. I don't think we're talking about, fetching coffee and the like. This is from Kenneth Garger at the New York Post. A reporter for the NFL Network sparked a fierce Twitter debate on Monday after simply sharing an opening for an internship. Jane Slater was met with online backlash shortly after she tweeted the position offered to broadcast journalism students. I posted an opportunity for an unpaid internship, and I'm amazed at the comments I get, she wrote. It's not even for me, it's for someone else, and I would have jumped at it in college. I had 3 unpaid internships in school, double majored, and had a job. Shake my head, she said. 3 unpaid internships, double majored, and had a job. I'd like to see the records. I would very much like to see the records. Slater's post pitted those who believe unpaid internships have career value against those who feel the practice should be eliminated for alienating a whole pool of potential candidates. And I'm looking at a picture of this duck-lipped woman here. Lawrence Zierlin, NFL draft analyst for NFL.com, wrote, the phrase unpaid internship is looked way down on nowadays. Too many people have no idea how it helps to get a foot in the door that become your first big job. ESPN NFL draft analyst Matt Miller noted that he would not be where he is today without an unpaid writing opportunity at Bleacher Report. On the other hand, freelance science journalist Aaron Biba argued unpaid internships are just exploitation, even when you were in college and too young to understand that. Elika Sadiga also said that the practice of unpaid internships should end, quote, I don't think you should be attacked for sharing an opportunity, but I do think it's worth noting that we should be doing away with unpaid labor, that unpaid internships disproportionately leave out certain groups, and we shouldn't justify anything simply because we had to do it. Other commenters cited Slater's family's financial well-being as a reason for being able to take on 3 unpaid internships at school, which she took offense to. Her late grandfather was the former president of Wolf Brand Chili, which I understand is the official chili of the state of Texas. Easy to grind when your grandpa runs a multi-million business, one person, right? Later Monday, Slater posted a statement on Twitter to clear the air. Quote, I acknowledge that I had a grandfather who had money, but I did not grow up rich. I always had a job and was taught to value hard work and paying my own bills. Did others have it harder? Absolutely. Which is why I always want and feel compelled to help others when I can. I won't stop trying to help the next generation. I apologize that I came across elitist today, always trying to learn, and Twitter isn't the best place for these debates. Now, it was explained to me back in the 1990s when I was working in San Diego in radio that you couldn't have people work for free because my boss, who was the program director of the station, he'd been approached by someone who said that he wanted to, work for him. Oh, well, I'm not really looking for anyone. Oh, I'll do it for free. You'll do it for free? Yeah, I'll do it for free. Well, he worked for my boss for some time, and then he sued my boss, asking for money accumulated over months or whatever, and he got money because the principle in law at that time was that you can't work for free because that's indentured servitude or slavery. But now apparently the law has changed and it's perfectly acceptable. But this business of certain groups being left out, what certain groups would they be? This is not primarily a racial or ethnic thing. It's a class thing. It's people whose parents are not rich. who are being left out. Now, even if you've seen the movie The Last Days of Disco, the young women who work for this publishing company, well, finding accommodation in New York City that is not disgusting is rather a problem. And one of these young women is talking to a senior person at the publisher. And don't your parents help out? Well, yes, our parents do help out. In other words, they wouldn't have been able to take these jobs in publishing without having well-off parents. And of course, they were being paid. Now, imagine the problem of, having to live in New York City, having to find an apartment, and, you're not being paid. Well, and it's not just New York City. Obviously, there's a lot of expensive cities across the United States. I was thinking earlier today about Paul Schrader, who did the film Autofocus. And this was a film without a big budget. It's about Bob Crane, the star of Hogan's Heroes, and his disgusting personal habits. It's a really fine film. It's let's say it's intense. Some people might find it overwhelming. But in his commentary, Schrader notes that the credits for the film, which are quite striking, were made by a young fellow, and he was paid in sweat equity, is the phrase. Now, obviously, this young fellow would have been preferred to, be paid for his fine work, but what he could do with this is to say, hey, I did the credits for a Hollywood film starring Greg Kinnear and Willem Dafoe that people say is wonderful and pretty good, huh? And, yeah, that would be genuinely useful to that man. When you hear about how many internships young people now have, one has to wonder just how useful they are. Do they simply want free labor from people? Slater further pointed out, according to the Daily Mail, that she started in TV for $16,500. It was Neil Simon that once wrote that the really important wage increase, keep in mind he said this decades ago, is from $0 to $200 a week. Yeah, there is nothing so overwhelming as having money when you didn't have money before. So, this woman, she was earning only $16,500, which is obviously a terrible salary, but it is a lot more than nothing. So she was born in 1980. She'll be 41 years old this year. So we're roughly talking about 20 years ago. She was earning $16,500, and I think this was for the NFL Network. Dallas, I think. Dallas. But here's an amusing story about this duck-lipped woman, which I came across by accident, which one can include in the category of women posting their L's online. This is a story from Women's Health from Emily Schiffer from December 9th, 2019. NFL Network reporter Jane Slater tweeted that she learned an ex-boyfriend was cheating on her thanks to his Fitbit. She shared her story on Twitter in response to the tweet about the Peloton holiday ad that recently went viral. If you remember that, it was an enormous controversy 2 years ago. There was a commercial where a young, fit woman was given a Peloton exercise device by her husband, and she is so thrilled by this gift that she gets a little weepy about it, which was described as sexist, misogynist, and horrible for reasons that are completely beyond me. In any event, after the Peloton ad controversy, NFL Network reporter Jane Slater took to Twitter to tell the story of how she caught her ex cheating on her thanks to his Fitbit. She tweeted, an ex-boyfriend once got me a Fitbit for Christmas. I loved it. We synced up, motivated each other, didn't hate it until he was unaccounted for at 4 a.m. and his physical activity levels were spiking on the app. She ended her tweet with, wish the story wasn't real. Spoiler alert, he was not enrolled in an Orange Theory class at 4 a.m. This is a phenomenon which is new to me. So apparently, you can monitor your partner's heart rate level. I suppose that might be useful if you were in your 70s or you had a history of heart disease or whatever. This insane level of closeness and lack of privacy. Oh, just it reminds me of that song Turning Japanese. This fellow's talking about his ex-girlfriend and pictures of her. I want a doctor to take a picture of you from inside as well. Yes. It seems a little deranged to me. But how many interns are there in the United States? Now, keep in mind, this is an upper class. This is a ruling class phenomenon, overwhelmingly. But it's a popular one. This is from comparecamp.com, Arthur Zuckerman, May 2020. More and more students seize internship opportunities, and for good reasons. Studies show that having an internship experience leads to full-time job prospects and higher pay. As such, companies build structured and often lucrative internship programs. These also double as a talent pool for a firm's future hiring activities. Yet there is also a dark side to internships. In movies, interns often make coffee and do other menial tasks. Sadly, this caricature does exist in real life. They also face thorny legal issues like unpaid work and sexual harassment. For the class of 2020, in particular, COVID-related hiring freezes impacted internship programs. So, 56% of interns and 40% of co-op students turned into full-time entry-level hires in 2019. 53% of the class of 2019 seniors who applied for a full-time job got at least one job offer. Out of this percentage, 57% of students who received a job offer completed an internship. And I thought that this story had numbers. Okay, hang on. Paid interns said they expected to earn at least $50,000 more than those who are unpaid interns or have no internship experience. Oh, okay. Paid internships. Okay, I believe the figure was somewhere between. Yes, here we go. An estimated 500,000 to 1 million Americans work as unpaid interns every year. About 43% of internships are unpaid. An internship costs $6,000 on average in major cities in the U.S. The opportunity cost for an unpaid internship is $13,000. This figure factors in minimum wage rates and the cost of living. I recall coming across information about daughter of one of my colleagues, a fairly prominent figure, ex-colleague, quite prominent figure in Canadian journalism. And I saw that this woman had managed to land what seemed to be a good job with a major, let's say, well-being concern in the United States. And then I looked at her CV, and I saw that she had started an MBA and then dropped it and started another one and completed it. And she'd had a whole host of internships. And I figured that her father must have been on the hook for something like $250,000. Now, obviously, there are a few of us who can afford to spend $250,000 supporting our children until they manage to find a decent job. And this is unpaid internships are a means by which the oligarchy maintains its power and screens out competition from lower classes. And I don't really recall progressives making much of a fuss about this, strangely enough. Some good news from Denmark, from the Daily Mail. Denmark has become the first European country to tell Syrian migrants that they must return to their home country, saying it is now safe for them there. The Scandinavian nation has stripped 94 Syrian refugees of their residency permits after it determined Damascus and the surrounding area as being safe. Migrants will be sent to deportation camps but will not be forced to leave. But rights groups say the government is trying to give migrants no other option than to return to Syria on their own accord. Matthias Tesfaye, Denmark's immigration minister, said last month that the country had been open and honest from the start with refugees coming from Syria. We've made it clear to them that their residence permit is temporary. It can be withdrawn if protection is no longer needed. His comments came as Denmark extended the parts of Syria considered safe for people to return. We must give people protection for as long as is needed, but when conditions in their home country improve, a former refugee should return home and reestablish a life there. Denmark's ruling center-left Social Democratic Party has taken a fierce anti-immigration stance in an effort to fend off challenges from parties on the right. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has promised to target 0 asylum seekers applying in the country. Well, yes. When you hear about asylum seekers, it's been a bait and switch. Oh, these people are under threat. Well, my reaction, I know this was talked of at the time, is Saudi Arabia is a very rich country indeed, and most of that country appears to be empty. Why can't these fellow Sunni Muslims take up residence there temporarily? But no. So this is just disguised immigration, people jumping the queue. And I'm glad to see that Denmark is actually taking this seriously. I'm going to talk about hair now, finally, particularly black women's hair. I am not interested in this subject in the slightest, but it has become a big deal. Seriously, a big deal. Steve Saylor wrote a piece last year, September 14th, called World War Hair, the New Forever War. 2 years ago, the half-black Naomi Osaka politely stood by while Serena Williams screamed at a tennis official over something or other during the final of the U.S. Open women's tennis tournament, a tantrum that launched 1,000 op-eds by angry, strong black women about how angry, strong black women like Serena deserve to act like jerks due to 1619 and redlining, and worst of all, society's prejudice against black hair. This year, Osaka correctly surmised that the way to get on the side of the media was not to be a polite Japanese, but to go the full, angry, strong black woman wearing masks featuring the names of various black lowlifes who have come to grief. And those names include Philandro Castile, Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Elijah McClain. Black masks, white lettering. This is an actual story from September 12th of last year from Robin Autry of NBC News. Yes, and it's all about hair, the importance of black women's hair. Whether it's colorful beads that clack or hair pieces attached at the back, black women's hair gets noticed, especially by white onlookers. However, with more black players on the courts and shifting public discourse about what's appropriate to say about black bodies, younger players are more likely to be interviewed about their beauty rituals and personal style. Osaka has been profiled in numerous magazines, such as Vogue and Elle. Black women with natural hair that has not been chemically straightened or relaxed can relate to the way Osaka talks about her curls, the way her hair reacts to humidity and its propensity for dryness. We can relate to her laughing at the unruliness of her hair at its best and worst quality. She watches YouTube tutorials and uses Miss Jessie's styling products, just like so many other black women with natural hair. It's this relatability that delights and should not be underestimated, especially given Osaka's multiracial heritage. She was born in Japan but grew up in the U.S. Her father is Haitian and her mother Japanese. She relinquished her U.S. citizenship for Japan and plays under its flag, but lives in Los Angeles and has been a vocal supporter of BLM. I suppose, in other words, you could call her a rootless cosmopolite. Indeed, she has said she doesn't feel quite American or Japanese or Haitian. Osaka's hair, bouncing in a few different directions as she darts across the tennis court, sometimes with her curl pattern defined and other times in more of a frizzy cloud, attracts attention and resonates with audience beyond the U.S. Just as being black or not or multiracial in the U.S. involves upturning racial thinking, being black and Japanese challenges long-held beliefs about Japan as mono-ethnic. Osaka and other BLM protests are shining a light on racism in Japan, inspiring discussions about what it means to be Japanese and about the lives of the country's multiracial population. Some are now questioning why people with mixed heritage are referred to hafu, or half, suggesting they're somehow less Japanese than others. She's widely regarded not just as a Japanese celebrity, but as a role model for her talent and social activism. It's the fluffy curliness of Osaka's hair that makes it stand out against the sharp white backdrop of the tennis world because it represents her agency, not just her body. While hair may not seem like a big deal, it is. I began to hear about a decade ago, just a few stories in the media, a few mentions in various places, that apparently white people, especially white women, are obsessed with black women's hair. And they cannot refrain from asking to touch it or simply reaching out and touching it. I do not believe that for a second. That's the sort of thing a small child might do. But of course, small children are constantly grabbing everything in sight. So I don't know how significant it is. Only a lunatic or a sociopath would go around grabbing other people's hair. It's not happened. But this is a meme that has become real, that it's been repeated so often that it would seem, based on what I've come across, that half or more of black women in the United States actually believe, one, that white people, especially white women, are obsessed with their hair, and two, that they cannot stop themselves from grabbing handfuls of it. To which I responded, "Dear black people, we are not interested in your hair. Sincerely yours, white people." This is a real tweet from CBC Arts, CBC being the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. 21 Black Futures, Series 3, Episode 3. The Prescription by Lisa Codrington. A black woman is the first recipient of a revolutionary new treatment for those affected by racism, bigotry, white supremacy, or unwanted hair touching. Too good to be true? Recipient 1 thinks so. And there's a picture of this woman as this recipient 1. She's morbidly obese. Okay. I don't, is that de rigueur now? Is Lizzo changed everything for everyone now? But I went, they have a website. A Radical Offering in Unprecedented Times, the story of 21 Black Futures by Mumbi Tinyebwa Otu, artistic director, Obsidian Theater Company. This woman writes, "In July 2020, I began my journey as the new artistic director of Obsidian Theater Company, a 20-year-old ensemble with a strong legacy of centering and championing Black stories and Black artists. We were in the midst of a pandemic and the global fight against racism and violence toward Black people. Theaters across the country were shut down, and the future of live performance was uncertain. To say that it was quite a time to begin my journey as an artistic director is an understatement." So apparently this is in 3 seasons, and there are 3 seasons into it so far. And the description of these episodes, barely believable. Here's one called The Sender. Syl Brown loves her work. Her job as a sender on a global racism elimination project has resulted in a peaceful, logical, and sustainable world. However, she encounters technical difficulties when a sendee objects to restrictions on the lives of residents of white supremacist island. Yeah, that happened. Ya, in the never expanding world. Ya, or Ja, a former student radical, who has a very strangely painted face, is speeding through the universe inside a dub song. As they travel, a blue macaw urges them to relive a demonstration during which a colonial monument was toppled. The earthly consequences were dire, but ancestors intervened to offer Ja an eternal reward. Okay, in the year 2020, and just hours after receiving a terminal diagnosis, Audrey struggles to discuss an uncertain future with her 10-year-old daughter, Bina. Mother and daughter are among the last surviving members of the Abanu people, a community of African-descended people who resisted transatlantic slavery. Eager to ensure survival of their culture, Audrey instructs Bina in their traditional language using American Sign Language and other gestures. That one seems a little less crazy than the others. As far as I can see, these stories are about extinction. Black people are in no danger of extinction. But you see the paranoia which has come to the fore. There were 400,000 black slaves brought to America, and there's now, what, close to 50 million black people? So obviously, complaints about genocide are absurd, absolutely absurd. But let's get to season 3 here, and that one that I started discussing. Oh, here's one: Rebirth of the Astronauts, a Black Space Odyssey. It's New Year's Eve, 2059, the night before the long-awaited Reparations Day, and Chariot, with 2 T's, receives a mysterious call that leads her on a ride through the world outside her bubble. Cities are sky high, a curfew is on, and it's hard to tell humans from holograms. On the surreal road trip, she tunes into the Black Space X radio and is helped along by a cadre of cryptic guides, and finds herself on the astronomical journey of her life. Okay, here we go. Season 3 here. Just hold on. Oh, 40 parsecs and some fuel. The prescription. Here we go. Open your big black mouth. I'm not making any of this up. You can go to cbc.ca art projects, 21 Black Futures. Open Your Big Black Mouth, a brand new treatment designed to help Black women affected by racism, bigotry, microaggressions, white supremacy, exotification, or unwanted hair touching, has just been rolled out. Acute or severe, this specially formulated treatment of endless doses of time and space allows Black women to speak their mind and be heard, because obviously they're not speaking their mind or being heard now. The first recipient of this revolutionary treatment has just been given her prescription, and she's skeptical, to say the least. The year is 2042. There have been technological advances in the field of medicine. Who could have seen that coming? Especially in the area of mental health and wellness. Chantal Thompson, 30, also known as recipient 1, is the first to be administered an innovative treatment called Open Your Big Black Mouth. The technology is marketed as a cure for chronic depression and anxiety in Black people overwhelmed by everyday microaggressions, oppression, and anti-Black racism. Never before has a Black woman been given the space to say what's on her mind and not have to deal with white fragility. Did I mention the word paranoia? The monologue follows a skeptical Chantal coming to terms with what this new treatment means for her life. Will it work? What are the side effects? And is she willing to take the risk and accept the consequences? Directing Lisa Codrington's monologue is a creative highlight for me because it conjures so many emotions that Black women feel today. This is the first time I've worked with text that unapologetically propels an unfettered internal conversation from a Black Canadian woman. It's a tour de force about language that plays with how we receive Black women's stories. What we hear between what is said and what is not said is raw and familiar. And I equally enjoyed the process of discovering how deeply we explore the feelings with actress Akosu Amo Adam, who is just magical. By the way, are there any, all of the Black people in Canada now from Nigeria, say, or thereabouts? What about other, there have been Black people in Canada for a while. But the Africans, the West Africans, simply seem to have found themselves on top in a very short order. Alison Duke, the director, says, I've often reflected on what life would be like if I, like Chantal, could say what's on my mind. Because women today, they're timid little mice. They don't dare to speak out. What's on my mind about racism, oppression, and sexism without having to reflect on the consequences. Oh, so you want to be able to say whatever you want without consequences. That sounds pretty traditional. I'm drawn to this idea, which is both raw and new. No, it's as old as time. Alison Duke. Okay, let's have a final look at the chat before we wrap it up here. Ogan's Iron says, seriously, pop culture has managed to swallow this incredibly absurd notion that Black women are these huge tech and science nerds. Jogokin 666 says, yes, Black women need encouragement to open their mouths. Media Hit says, you mean like that NASA movie? Yes, wallflowers, says Gamanyan. This is just the complete opposite of the truth. The complete opposite of the truth, but yeah, that's where we are today. I don't know. There was a hashtag on Twitter. It was something about encouraging Black women to get with white men. That was trending today. Apparently, there's Black women out there who are fed up at what they perceive to be abusive treatment from Black males. Neil Terry says there was good Black music throughout the 20th century, but all modern Black art in any medium is ridiculous, self-obsessed, childish, and or just gross. Well, I've talked about this before. If you wanted to get into the, say, R&B, soul music, Motown, whatever, in the old days, you had to be able to sing or play instruments or write songs or produce records. And none of that is necessary anymore. And so, we can see the results, but, we say a similar thing in white popular music as well. Okay, so that's it for today. Hang on a second here. I just have to reply to this, and I'll be right with you. What's coming up this week? I mentioned previously that I'm going to be discussing Helen Andrews' book, Boomers, on the book club on Friday. She's a very clever woman, I must say. I was expecting good things from this book, but, there's a tendency, if you're a younger person writing a book about boomers, that it's just going to be taking shots at people. Ooh, sick burn. And the book is deeply thought out and quite rewarding. And on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be discussing Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up. So I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have not done so already, if you would like to make a donation to this live stream, very much appreciated at this particular time in my life. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can make a donation via Interact to this live stream at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.